I never thought shoveling snow would lead to federal charges, but when you mess with the wrong person's property in an HOA-controlled neighborhood, sometimes justice comes in forms you never expect. My name is Marcus Valdez, and I moved into the Pinewood Meadows subdivision in Erie, Pennsylvania 3 years ago. It seemed like a decent place at first, nice houses, quiet streets, and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. What I didn't realize was that our homeowners association president, a woman named Brenda Patterson, ran the place like her personal fiefdom. She was the textbook definition of an HOA Karen, complete with the highlighted bob haircut, perpetually pursed lips, and an addiction to finding violations in everyone's yard. The trouble started in January during one of those brutal lake-effect snowstorms that Pennsylvania gets from Lake Erie. We're talking about 2 feet of snow dumped overnight, the kind that buries cars and makes driveways disappear. I'd invested in a really good snow shovel the previous autumn, a professional-grade aluminum model with an ergonomic handle that had cost me nearly $80. It wasn't just any shovel. This thing was a beast, lightweight but incredibly durable, and it made clearing snow actually manageable instead of back-breaking torture. That morning, I woke up at 6 to start clearing my driveway before heading to work. I'm a postal inspector for the United States Postal Service, Office of Inspector General. Most people don't know what that means, but essentially, I investigate crimes related to the postal system. Mail theft, mail fraud, assaults on postal workers, that kind of thing. It's federal law enforcement work, and I carry a badge and weapon just like any other federal agent. I grabbed my coffee, bundled up in my heavy winter coat, and headed out to the garage. That's when I noticed something wrong. The spot where I always kept my shovel, hanging on the wall next to my garden tools, was empty. I figured maybe I'd left it outside after the last snowfall, so I checked the front porch, the back deck, even around the side of the house. Nothing. My expensive, nearly new snow shovel had vanished. I was standing in my driveway, knee-deep in snow, trying to figure out what happened when my neighbor, Tom Richardson, called out from his own property. He was an older guy, retired from the steel industry, and one of the few people in the neighborhood who wasn't afraid of Brenda. "Looking for your shovel?" he asked, leaning on his own beat-up model. "Yeah, you seen it. Brenda took it yesterday evening. I saw her walking down the street with it around 5 o'clock. I stared at him. She what? Took it right out of your garage. Your door was open while you were bringing in groceries, I guess. She walked in, grabbed it, and marched off with it like she owned the place." My jaw clenched. "Are you serious? Dead serious?" I thought maybe you'd lent it to her or something, but the way she was acting, all huffy and superior, I figured there was more to it. I pulled out my phone and called Brenda's number. It was listed on all the HOA documents as the primary contact for neighborhood issues. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Marcus, what can I do for you this early in the morning? You can return my snow shovel. Tom saw you take it from my garage yesterday." There was a pause, then her tone shifted to that condescending pitch that made my blood pressure spike. "Oh, that shovel. Yes, I confiscated it." "You what?" "I confiscated it." As HOA president, I have the authority to temporarily seize property that's being used in violation of community standards. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "Brenda, what are you talking about? It's a snow shovel. How is a snow shovel violating anything?" "Last week, you piled snow on the border between your property and the common area. That's a direct violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws. The snow must be distributed evenly across your own property or removed entirely." By piling it near the property line, you created an eyesore and potentially damaged community landscaping. It's January in Pennsylvania. There's snow everywhere, and I piled it there because that's the most practical place to put it while clearing the driveway. Nevertheless, it's a violation. I sent you an email about it 3 days ago. I hadn't checked my HOA email folder in a week. Those messages were usually just Brenda complaining about someone's holiday decorations or lawn height, so I'd gotten in the habit of ignoring them. Even if that's true, you can't just walk into my garage and take my property. That's theft. It's not theft, it's confiscation under HOA authority. You'll get your shovel back once you pay the fine for the violation and submit a written plan for proper snow disposal going forward. How much is the fine? $250 for the initial violation plus $50 per day until it's resolved. Since it's been 3 days since my email, that's $400 total. I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. You're insane. I'm not paying that, and I want my shovel back today. Then I'll see you at the next HOA board meeting where we can discuss your multiple violations and your hostile attitude toward community leadership. She hung up. I stood there in the snow, phone in hand, absolutely fuming. This wasn't the first time Brenda had overstepped her authority. She'd fine people for having the wrong shade of white on their mailboxes, threatened legal action against a family whose kid's basketball hoop was 6 inches over the property line, and even tried to ban a neighbor's service dog because it wasn't on the HOA's approved breed list. But this was different. This was outright theft of my personal property. Tom was watching me from his driveway. She's not giving it back, is she? Not without a fight. You know where she keeps it? Where? Her garage. I saw her put it in there. She's got a whole collection of stuff she's confiscated from people over the years. It's like a trophy room. That gave me an idea, but I needed to think it through carefully. I couldn't just break into her garage and take my shovel back. That would make me the criminal, and Brenda would have a field day pressing charges and using it as ammunition to make my life even more miserable. No, I needed to handle this properly, through official channels. I borrowed Tom's shovel and spent the next hour clearing my driveway, my mind working through the problem. By the time I finished, I'd formulated a plan. If Brenda wanted to play the authority card, I'd show her what real authority looked like. I called my supervisor at the Office of Inspector General, a woman named Sarah Chen who'd been with the agency for 15 years. I explained the situation, carefully keeping my tone professional. "So your HOA president stole your personal property," she said when I finished. "That's the bottom line, yes. And she did this by entering your garage without permission, correct? Marcus, you know this isn't really our jurisdiction, right? This is a local police matter, maybe small claims court." "I know, but here's the thing." I started thinking about all the other stuff she's confiscated from people. Tom mentioned she has a whole collection. What if some of that property was used in the commission of federal crimes? What if there's evidence she's been systematically stealing from residents, possibly across state lines if she's selling anything online? Sarah was quiet for a moment. "That's a stretch, maybe, but it's worth a preliminary investigation, isn't it? At minimum, we could check if she's been intercepting anyone's mail. She has access to the neighborhood mailbox cluster, and several residents have complained about missing packages." That got her attention. Mail theft was squarely within our jurisdiction, and it was a federal crime that carried serious penalties. "Have you documented these complaints?" "I can get documentation. Give me a few days to talk to neighbors and gather evidence. If there's enough for probable cause, we could get a warrant to search her property." Sarah sighed. "You're really committed to this, aren't you?" She walked into my garage and stole my property, then tried to extort $400 from me. Yeah, I'm committed. All right. Gather what you can, but keep it by the book. If this turns into a personal vendetta, it'll blow up in both our faces. I spent the next 3 days doing exactly what I'd promised. I knocked on doors throughout Pinewood Meadows, talking to neighbors about their experiences with Brenda and the HOA. What I found was even worse than I'd expected. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman 2 streets over, told me that Brenda had confiscated her garden gnomes last summer, claiming they violated the community's aesthetic standards. She'd never gotten them back, despite paying a $75 fine. The Martinez family had lost a custom mailbox that had been in their family for generations. Brenda declared it non-compliant and removed it while they were on vacation. When they returned, a generic black mailbox had been installed in its place, and Brenda claimed the old one had been disposed of. But the most concerning information came from Janet Morrison, a single mother who worked 2 jobs. She told me that several of her packages had gone missing over the past 6 months, always things ordered online that were supposed to be delivered to the cluster mailbox. She'd filed complaints with the retailers, but they all showed the items as delivered. I thought maybe I was going crazy, Janet said, bouncing her toddler on her hip. Or that porch pirates were getting them somehow, even though they were in the locked mailboxes. Did you ever mention this to anyone in the neighborhood? I mentioned it to Brenda once, actually. She said I should be more careful about tracking my deliveries and that the HOA wasn't responsible for my carelessness. I made careful notes of everything, collecting dates, descriptions of missing items, and copies of delivery confirmations. By the time I was done, I had statements from 11 different residents documenting missing mail or packages, plus another 8 documenting property that Brenda had confiscated and never returned. I compiled everything into a formal report and submitted it to Sarah. She reviewed it with the agency's legal team, and 3 days later she called me back. "We're going to move forward with this," she said. The pattern of missing packages is concerning enough to warrant investigation, and the property confiscation issue adds weight to the probable cause for a search warrant. We're coordinating with the local police department since there are potential state law violations as well. What's the timeline? The warrant application is going to the federal magistrate tomorrow. If approved, we'll execute it within 48 hours. You'll be part of the team, but Marcus, you need to stay professional. This can't look like a personal attack. Understood. The warrant was approved the next afternoon. I got the call while I was finishing up paperwork at the office. Federal Magistrate Judge William Torres had signed off on a search warrant for Brenda Patterson's residence and vehicle, authorizing us to search for evidence of mail theft, fraud, and stolen property. We scheduled the execution for 7 in the morning on Saturday, figuring that would be the best time to catch Brenda at home. The team consisted of myself, 2 other postal inspectors named Rodriguez and Jackson, plus 2 officers from the Erie Police Department. We met at a parking lot a quarter mile from Pinewood Meadows to go over the plan. We approach the door, knock and announce, serve the warrant, and conduct the search, Sarah explained. She'd driven up from Pittsburgh to supervise personally. We're looking for packages, mail, shipping materials, evidence of online sales, and any property that matches the descriptions in the stolen property reports. Everyone clear? We all nodded. Marcus, I want you visible but not leading. This needs to be by the book. Got it. The drive to Brenda's house took less than 5 minutes. She lived in one of the larger homes in Pinewood Meadows, a 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn and not a single decoration out of place. Her driveway was already cleared of snow, creating a pristine path to her front door. We parked on the street, 4 official vehicles that would be impossible to miss. Sarah led the way to the front door with Rodriguez beside her. I hung back with Jackson and the police officers, making sure my credentials were visible on my coat. Sarah rang the doorbell and knocked firmly. "Federal agents with a search warrant. Open the door, please." There was silence for a long moment, then I heard movement inside. The door opened and Brenda appeared, wearing a fluffy pink bathrobe and fuzzy slippers. Her highlighted hair was slightly mussed from sleep, and she wasn't wearing her usual makeup. When she saw the badges and uniforms, her face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, shock, and then recognition when her eyes landed on me. "Marcus, what is this?" Sarah held up the warrant. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen with the United States Postal Service Office of Inspector General. We have a federal search warrant for your residence and vehicle. Please step aside." Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "A search warrant for what?" "Mail theft, fraud, and stolen property. The warrant is signed by a federal magistrate judge. You can read it if you'd like, but we're coming in either way." "This is absurd. I haven't stolen anything. This is harassment," one of the police officers, a veteran named Martinez, spoke up. "Madam, you can file a complaint later. Right now, you need to step aside and let us do our job." Brenda looked at me again, and I saw the moment she connected the dots. "You did this. You're doing this because I confiscated your shovel." I kept my voice level. "I'm here because multiple residents of this neighborhood reported missing mail and stolen property. This is a federal investigation. My shovel. You're trying to ruin my life over a stupid shovel." Sarah's patience was wearing thin. "Mrs. Patterson, step aside now, or we'll move you aside." "Your choice." Brenda finally moved, backing into her foyer with a look of pure outrage on her face. We filed into the house and Sarah handed her a copy of the warrant. Brenda snatched it and immediately pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my lawyer. This is illegal. This is police brutality." "You're welcome to call your lawyer," Sarah said calmly. "Officer Martinez will stay with you while we conduct the search. Don't interfere with our investigation and don't touch anything we're examining." Rodriguez and Jackson headed upstairs to check the bedrooms while Sarah and I made our way to the garage. One of the police officers went to the basement. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, though I kept my expression neutral and professional. Brenda's garage was immaculate, like everything else about her property. Shelves lined the walls, organized with clear plastic bins labeled in neat handwriting. There was a workbench with tools arranged by size, a pegboard with garden implements, and in the back corner, a large storage cabinet with padlocked doors. Sarah pointed at the cabinet. "Start there." I approached it carefully, taking photos with my department-issued camera before touching anything. The padlock was substantial, a heavy-duty model that required a key. "Mrs. Patterson," Sarah called toward the house, "we need the key to this cabinet." "I don't have to give you anything," Brenda shouted back. "Actually, the warrant says you do. We can cut the lock if necessary, but that's going to cause damage. Your choice." There was muttering, then Officer Martinez appeared with a key ring. "She says it's the small brass key." I took the ring and found the key, turning it in the lock. The mechanism clicked and I pulled the doors open. What I saw made my jaw drop. The cabinet was packed with items. My snow shovel was right in front, leaning against the left side, but that was just the beginning. There were garden gnomes, decorative mailboxes, wind chimes, welcome mats, lawn ornaments, and at least 24 unopened packages of various sizes. Sarah stepped forward, her expression hardening. "Start documenting everything. Photos first, then inventory." I spent the next 30 minutes carefully photographing every item in the cabinet, making sure to capture details and any visible addresses on the packages. The packages were what concerned me most. They were all from major retailers like Amazon, Target, and Walmart, and they were all addressed to different residents of Pinewood Meadows. Sarah picked up one of the packages, examining the label. "This is addressed to Janet Morrison. Delivery date was November 15th. "That's almost 2 months ago," I said. "We found packages for 6 different residents, all delivered between October and December, all showing as successfully delivered in the tracking systems. This wasn't just theft. This was systematic mail fraud." Rodriguez came down from upstairs carrying a laptop and a file box. "You need to see this. She's been keeping records." We moved to Brenda's kitchen table, where Rodriguez opened the laptop and the file box. Inside the box were printed spreadsheets listing every HOA violation Brenda had issued over the past 3 years, complete with fine amounts, payment status, and descriptions of confiscated property. "Look at this," Rodriguez said, pointing at the screen. "She's been selling the confiscated items on eBay." The laptop was logged into an eBay account under the username Pinewood Resale. The sales history showed dozens of transactions over the past 2 years: garden decorations, tools, mailboxes, even furniture. The total sales amount was over $15,000. Sarah's face was grim. "Mrs. Patterson, come here, please." Officer Martinez escorted Brenda into the kitchen. Her face was red and she was clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Can you explain this eBay account?" Sarah asked. "That's mine. It's not illegal to sell things online. It is when you're selling stolen property. Every item you've sold came from your neighbors, taken without their consent under false pretenses. They were HOA violations. I had the authority to confiscate non-compliant items." "Show me where in the HOA bylaws it says you can permanently seize property and sell it for personal profit." Brenda's mouth worked soundlessly. Sarah continued, "And the packages? The ones addressed to other people that somehow ended up locked in your garage?" "I don't know what you're talking about. Mrs. Patterson, we found packages addressed to 6 different residents, all marked as delivered. You have access to the mailbox cluster keys as HOA president. Did you intercept these packages? I want my lawyer." "That's your right." "Officer Martinez, please read Mrs. Patterson her rights." The officer pulled out a card and began reciting the Miranda warning while Brenda stood there, her face cycling between rage and panic. When he finished, Sarah nodded to the other officers. "Brenda Patterson, you're under arrest for mail theft, a federal crime under Title 18 United States Code, Section 1708. Additional charges may be filed pending the completion of our investigation." The female officer who'd been searching the basement produced handcuffs. Brenda's eyes went wide. "You can't arrest me. This is my house. I'm the HOA president." "Being HOA president doesn't put you above federal law," Sarah said quietly. "You stole mail. That's a federal felony with a penalty of up to 5 years in prison." The officer cuffed Brenda's hands behind her back, and that's when the reality seemed to hit her. Her knees buckled slightly, and she started crying, actual tears running down her face. "Please, I didn't mean to. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood nice. Everything I did was for the community." "You stole packages containing things people needed and sold confiscated property for $15,000 in personal profit," I said, unable to keep quiet any longer. "That wasn't for the community. That was for you." Brenda looked at me with something between hatred and desperation. "This is all because of your stupid shovel. You've ruined everything over a shovel." "No," I said firmly. This is because you're a thief. The shovel was just what made me look closely enough to see it. They led her out to one of the police cars while we continued processing the scene. It took another 3 hours to document everything, box up the evidence, and secure the property. We contacted each resident whose packages we'd found, asking them to come identify their items and provide statements. Janet Morrison actually cried when we handed her the box containing her missing packages. "I thought I was losing my mind," she said, wiping her eyes. "One of these was my daughter's birthday present. I had to scramble to buy something else, and I couldn't afford much." "We're sorry this happened," Sarah told her. "We'll need you to provide a formal statement for the prosecution, but your packages are yours." By early afternoon, we'd returned every package to its rightful owner and made contact with most of the people whose confiscated property we'd found. My snow shovel was sitting in my garage again, right where it belonged. Tom Richardson watched the whole thing from his driveway, a satisfied expression on his weathered face. When I walked over to thank him for the information that had started everything, he just shook his head. "Been waiting for someone to take her down for years. Never thought it'd be federal agents, though. That's some serious business. Mail theft is no joke. She's looking at real prison time if convicted. Good. Maybe the next HOA president will remember that they're supposed to serve the community, not lord over it like some kind of dictator." The case moved forward quickly after that. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Pennsylvania took it on personally. Brenda was charged with 6 counts of mail theft, multiple counts of fraud, and the local district attorney added state charges for theft and receiving stolen property. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, arguing that she'd made mistakes but hadn't intended to commit federal crimes. The prosecution wasn't interested. The evidence was overwhelming, from the packages in her garage to the eBay sales records to her own meticulous documentation of confiscated property. The preliminary hearing was in March, and I had to testify about the investigation. Brenda sat at the defense table in a conservative blue suit, looking nothing like the intimidating HOA president who'd terrorized Pinewood Meadows. She looked small and defeated. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp woman named Amanda Foster, walked me through the discovery of the stolen packages and confiscated property. I kept my testimony factual and professional, describing what we'd found and how it connected to the complaints from residents. When the defense attorney cross-examined me, he tried to make it personal. "Inspector Valdez, isn't it true that you initiated this investigation because Mrs. Patterson confiscated your snow shovel?" "The investigation was initiated because multiple residents reported missing mail and packages. My stolen shovel was what prompted me to start talking to neighbors, which revealed a pattern of theft. But you had a personal grudge against Mrs. Patterson." "I had a legitimate complaint about stolen property. When I investigated that complaint, I uncovered evidence of federal crimes. That's my job." The attorney tried a few more angles, but none of them stuck. The evidence spoke for itself. The judge bound Brenda over for trial, setting a date in May. Her bail was set at $50,000, which she posted, but she was required to surrender her passport and stay within the Western District of Pennsylvania. The HOA called an emergency meeting 2 weeks after her arrest. The board voted unanimously to remove her as president and launched their own investigation into her activities. They discovered that she'd been paying herself an unauthorized salary of $2,000 per month from HOA dues, money that was supposed to go toward neighborhood maintenance and improvements. The new HOA president was a retired teacher named Dorothy Walsh, who immediately sent out a letter to all residents apologizing for Brenda's actions and promising reform. One of her first acts was to repeal the ridiculous fine system that Brenda had instituted. Violations would now be handled with warnings first, reasonable fines only for repeated issues, and absolutely no confiscation of personal property under any circumstances. The mood in Pinewood Meadows changed almost overnight. People actually started talking to each other again, helping with yard work, organizing neighborhood barbecues. It was like Brenda's removal had lifted a weight off the entire community. In April, just a few weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, Brenda's lawyer contacted the prosecution about a plea deal. She was willing to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentencing recommendation of probation and restitution. The U.S. Attorney's Office agreed to consider it, but only with conditions. Brenda would have to pay full restitution to every victim, including reimbursement for the fair market value of all confiscated property she'd sold. She'd have to forfeit all profits from the eBay sales. And she'd have to accept a sentence that included at least some jail time. The negotiation took 2 weeks. In the end, Brenda accepted a plea agreement that included 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, and restitution totaling $22,000. It wasn't the maximum sentence she could have received, but it was substantial. The plea hearing was on a warm day in early May. The courtroom was packed with residents from Pinewood Meadows, all wanting to see justice done. Brenda stood before Judge Torres, her voice barely above a whisper as she pleaded guilty to each count. Judge Torres didn't mince words during the sentencing portion. "Mrs. Patterson, you held a position of trust within your community. You were supposed to help maintain and improve the neighborhood, not steal from your neighbors. You systematically violated federal law, intercepting packages and depriving people of their property. You sold confiscated items for personal profit, enriching yourself at the expense of the people you were supposed to serve. This court cannot overlook such a breach of trust." He accepted the plea agreement, sentencing Brenda to 18 months in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was ordered to report to the federal prison camp in Alderson, West Virginia, within 60 days. Several residents gave victim impact statements. Janet Morrison talked about the financial stress of replacing her daughter's stolen birthday present. An elderly man named Harold Chen described how losing his wife's garden gnomes had felt like losing a piece of her memory, since she'd passed away the previous year. Each statement painted a picture of the real harm Brenda had caused. When it was over, Brenda was led out of the courtroom by federal marshals. She didn't look at anyone, keeping her eyes on the floor. I felt a complex mix of emotions watching her go. Part of me felt vindicated. She'd stolen from me and dozens of others, abused her authority and broken federal law. She deserved to face consequences. But another part of me felt a strange sadness. This woman had thrown away her freedom, her reputation, and her life over what? Control? Money? Some twisted sense of power? Whatever it was, it hadn't been worth it. Outside the courthouse, several neighbors approached me to shake my hand and thank me. Tom Richardson clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good, Marcus, real good. I just did my job. Maybe, but not everyone would have pushed this hard. She would have kept stealing from people if you hadn't stopped her." Dorothy Walsh, the new HOA president, walked over with a warm smile. "Inspector Valdez, the board wanted me to thank you officially. We're also voting to reimburse you for the legal consultation fees and any other costs you incurred during this process." "That's not necessary." "It absolutely is. This should never have happened, and you shouldn't be out of pocket for exposing it. Please accept it." I nodded, appreciating the gesture. Life in Pinewood Meadows returned to normal over the following months. The restitution money started arriving as Brenda liquidated assets to pay what she owed. People got reimbursed for their stolen packages and confiscated property. The HOA established new bylaws with clear checks and balances on leadership authority. Dorothy proved to be an excellent president, actually listening to residents and working collaboratively to address issues. My snow shovel remained in its spot in the garage, a reminder of how something small can uncover something much larger. I used it that following winter, clearing my driveway after each snowfall, and I couldn't help but think about the chain of events it had triggered. Brenda reported to federal prison in July. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd sold her house to help pay the restitution, moving in with a sister in Ohio after her release date was set. She'd be on supervised release for 3 years after serving her sentence, meaning any violation could send her back to prison. The whole experience taught me something important about communities and authority. HOAs can serve a legitimate purpose, helping maintain property values and organize collective efforts. But they're only as good as the people running them. When someone like Brenda gets power without accountability, that power inevitably gets abused. In September, almost 8 months after the initial arrest, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Brenda, forwarded through her attorney. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten on lined paper, the kind you'd find in a prison commissary. Her handwriting was neat and controlled, just like everything else about her had been. "Inspector Valdez," it began. "I know you have no reason to read this, let alone believe anything I write. But I needed to try to explain, if only for my own peace of mind. I never set out to become what I became. When I first joined the HOA board, I genuinely wanted to help improve our neighborhood. I thought rules and standards would make everyone's property values increase, would make us a community people wanted to join. But somewhere along the way, I started seeing violations everywhere. Every little thing that didn't match my vision felt like a personal affront. The confiscation started as a way to enforce compliance, but then I realized I could sell the items. The money felt like compensation for all the work I put in, all the hours I spent on HOA business. The packages, those were different. That started by accident. I was checking the mailboxes for HOA newsletters, and I saw packages piling up for people who were on vacation. I took them to hold them safely, or at least that's what I told myself. Then I saw what was inside one, something I'd wanted, and I convinced myself that the person didn't really need it. It spiraled from there. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness or sympathy. I'm writing because you deserve to know that you were right to investigate, right to push forward even when I tried to make it about a petty grudge. I stole from people who trusted me, and I deserved everything that happened. I hope Pinewood Meadows is better without me. I hope the new leadership actually serves the community instead of trying to control it. And I hope you can use my example when you investigate other cases to show what happens when someone abuses a small amount of power. Sincerely, Brenda Patterson. I read the letter twice, then filed it away in a folder with the other case documents. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She'd acknowledged her guilt and accepted responsibility, which was more than many criminals ever did. But it didn't change what she'd done or undo the harm she'd caused. Work continued as normal through the fall and winter. I investigated mail fraud schemes, package theft rings, and assaults on postal carriers. Each case was important, protecting the integrity of the postal system and the people who relied on it. but none of them had quite the same personal connection as the Brenda Patterson case. The following January, exactly 1 year after this whole mess started, we got another major snowstorm. 2 feet of heavy, wet snow that buried everything overnight. I woke up early, made my coffee, and headed to the garage. My snow shovel was right where it should be, hanging on its hook, waiting. I spent the morning clearing my driveway, the rhythmic scrape of metal on concrete almost meditative. Neighbors were out doing the same, and we waved to each other, occasionally stopping to chat or help someone who was struggling with a particularly heavy drift. Tom Richardson came over with his ancient shovel, helping me clear the end of my driveway where the plow had left a wall of snow. "Can you believe it's been a year?" he asked. "Honestly, it feels like longer. Dorothy's doing a great job with the HOA. Did you see the new playground equipment she got approved for the common area? I saw the proposal. It looks good. My grandkids are going to love it when they visit this summer." He paused, leaning on his shovel. "You ever hear from Brenda? She sent me a letter a few months ago, apologizing more or less. That took guts, I guess. Not that it changes anything." "No, it doesn't." We finished the driveway and Tom headed back to his own property. I stood there for a moment, looking at the clean concrete, the piles of snow neatly arranged along the edges. Everything in its proper place, exactly as it should be. That evening, Dorothy sent out an email to all residents reminding everyone about proper snow removal procedures. The tone was helpful and informative, not threatening. She included offers to help elderly residents who might struggle with the heavy snow, organizing a volunteer list of neighbors willing to assist. It was exactly what an HOA should be: community members helping each other rather than a dictator enforcing arbitrary rules. The Brenda Patterson case became something of a legend in law enforcement circles. Other postal inspectors heard about it and would occasionally ask me about the details. It got used in training scenarios as an example of how following up on seemingly minor complaints can uncover larger criminal enterprises. The OIG even wrote it up in their internal newsletter as a case study in thorough investigation and inter-agency cooperation. For me, though, it was a reminder that justice sometimes comes from unexpected places. A stolen snow shovel led to federal charges, and a neighborhood tyrant ended up in federal prison. It proved that no one is above the law, no matter how much local authority they think they have. Brenda served her full 18-month sentence. I heard she was released in early 2027 and moved to Ohio permanently, staying with family and working at her retail job to pay off the remaining restitution. She'd never returned to Pinewood Meadows, and the neighborhood was better for it. As for me, I kept doing my job, investigating crimes that violated federal postal laws and protecting the mail system that millions of Americans depend on. Sometimes the cases were high-profile and complex. Sometimes they started with something as simple as a missing shovel. The key was never assuming that small crimes were insignificant. Every violation of the law mattered, every victim deserved justice, and every investigation deserved to be handled with professionalism and thoroughness. That's what I learned from the case, and that's what I carried forward into every investigation that followed. My snow shovel is still hanging in my garage, right where it belongs. Every time I use it, I'm reminded that standing up against injustice, no matter how small it might seem, is always worth the effort. And every time I clear my driveway and pile the snow along the edges without worrying about violating some arbitrary HOA rule, I'm grateful for a community that learned the difference between leadership and tyranny. Pinewood Meadows thrives now under Dorothy's steady hand. Property values have actually increased since Brenda's removal, probably because people want to live in a neighborhood where the HOA helps rather than harasses. The community feels like what it should have been all along: neighbors working together, supporting each other, and yes, following reasonable rules that actually serve a purpose. The case closed officially in March of 2027 when Brenda made her final restitution payment. The file went into storage, one of thousands of successful prosecutions by the Office of Inspector General. But for the people of Pinewood Meadows, it represented something more significant: proof that abuse of authority has consequences, that communities can heal and improve, and that sometimes justice arrives with a federal warrant. I still live in the same house, still clear my driveway after every snowfall, still nod to Tom Richardson across the way. Life is remarkably normal, exactly as it should be. And if someone ever asks me about the time an HOA Karen stole my snow shovel, I tell them the whole story, from start to finish, because it's a reminder that every criminal, no matter how small their crimes might seem, can be brought to justice when someone cares enough to investigate. The federal system worked exactly as it should. A crime was committed, evidence was gathered, a warrant was obtained, and the perpetrator faced consequences proportional to their actions. It wasn't about revenge or personal grudges. It was about the rule of law, applied fairly and without favoritism. And that, ultimately, is what separates legitimate authority from tyranny. Real authority comes with accountability, checks and balances, and respect for the rights of others. Brenda forgot that, or maybe never learned it in the first place. She thought being HOA president gave her unlimited power over her neighbors, but federal law proved otherwise. The snow shovel that started it all still works perfectly, clearing snow with the same efficiency it had when I first bought it. It's a tool, nothing more and nothing less, but it represents something important: the principle that your property is your property, and no one has the right to take it without legitimate authority and due process. Some people might think bringing federal charges over a stolen shovel was overkill. But it was never just about the shovel. It was about a pattern of theft, abuse of authority, and federal crimes that harmed dozens of people. The shovel was simply the key that unlocked the investigation, the piece of evidence that made me look closer at what was really happening in my neighborhood. And that's a lesson I carry with me every day in my work as a postal inspector. Pay attention to the small things, follow up on the minor complaints, and never assume that something is too insignificant to investigate properly. Because sometimes, a stolen snow shovel leads to federal prison, and a neighborhood tyrant ends up facing real consequences for the first time in her life. Justice doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it arrives at 7 in the morning on a Saturday, with badges and a federal search warrant, catching an HOA Karen completely off guard as she realizes that her reign of terror is finally over. And sometimes, the person who brings that justice is just a postal inspector who wanted his snow shovel back, and had the skills and authority to dig deeper when he discovered the theft was part of something much larger. The story of Brenda Patterson and Pinewood Meadows HOA is now part of the community's history, a cautionary tale about what happens when power goes unchecked. But it's also a story of redemption for the neighborhood itself, proof that communities can recover from abuse and thrive under proper leadership. Dorothy Walsh served as HOA president for 3 years before passing the role to another capable resident. The reforms she implemented remained in place, creating a sustainable system that prevented any future president from accumulating the kind of unchecked power Brenda had wielded. The community learned from its mistakes and became stronger for it. As for me, I continue to serve as a postal inspector, protecting the mail system and investigating federal crimes. The Brenda Patterson case remains one of my most memorable, not because it was the most complex or high profile, but because it showed how effective law enforcement could be when someone took the time to investigate properly and follow the evidence wherever it led. Every winter when the snow falls, I grab my shovel and clear my driveway, secure in the knowledge that my property is mine. My rights are protected, and justice prevails when people stand up against abuse of authority. And every time I see that shovel hanging in my garage, I remember the day Brenda Patterson froze when federal agents arrived at her door with a warrant, the moment when her world came crashing down because she forgot the most important lesson of all. No one is above the law, not even an HOA Karen who thought she ruled her little kingdom without consequence. That frozen moment of realization, when she saw me standing there with my badge and understood that her theft had triggered a federal investigation, was justice personified. And it all started with a stolen snow shovel and one postal inspector who refused to let theft and abuse go unchallenged.